With the Prince George Daily News here with our weekly panel, and joining me today is Todd Corrigall, Tracy Calogheros, and Chuck Nisbett. Mackenzie Kerr is unavailable today. So thanks everyone who's tuning in or going to tune in over the next little while and listen to what we have to say. I guess we can start off close to home this time around. The City Council meeting Monday night, Council endorsed a $180,000 review of its major capital projects, or how it deals with major capital projects. What was lacking in that was the report on the overages of the Parkade project, which I'm hoping would be a different report, because this one is basically to start a review of how they do projects on a global basis. Todd, let's start with you about what's your thoughts on a review of how they handle capital projects?
Yeah, I mean, a bit of a loaded question. I think it's a good opportunity anytime to review the way in which you do business and the way in which you are utilizing taxpayers' dollars for hopefully the betterment of the entire community. I think the challenge, and you said it right off the top, is we haven't seen a report back on the Parkade, which we're now going on near 5 months since that revelation has come forward, maybe even close to 6. I believe it was in December when it first came forward. And we haven't even seen a terms of reference for what that review process looks like. So there's a really missed opportunity from the city on how that could actually proceed and how they could help waylay some of the dialogue that's spinning out of control, I think, in the community. If you say, here's the terms of reference for what we're looking at from that perspective, that may alleviate some concerns and allow them the due time to do that work behind the scenes as they need to do, as there might be personal information that gets brought forward through that process. So then back to the consultant's report for capital projects and capital spending, they referenced a few key pieces in there. So the Auditor General for local government, I think, is a very key piece. That office has been disbanded, but there was a tremendous amount of recommendations that came forward through that process, and I think those can be levied quite easily. And I think there's still data available through that office that can be utilized, or the Office of Municipal Affairs that can be utilized. I think the other piece is PMPs, project management professionals, which is a professional designation which most large organizations have within their kitty of employees, is something that should have been considered much long ago. And now, as part of this process, I think what they need to be considering is any of those recommendations that come forward. I think they need to look at the whole planning and organization of their structure and say, we don't have that expertise here, and we've got an abundance over here. I don't want to see new positions added through this process. I think what you need to look at is how you manage process and how you manage projects, and then reallocate those resources strategically to ensure that you're covered.
Tracy, your thoughts on the city hiring a consultant? I guess that's the one. Consultants' reports often end up on the table. Are you hopeful or confident that this report will enact some change? And what change do they need to do there to make sure that these projects are on time and on budget?
Yeah, I don't disagree with Todd's comments around needing to have the report, and that having project management folks are not a bad thing. In fact, I'm working for the first time with a project management professional out of Noatone here in town, and I'm loving it. It's a wonderful thing for the person who's actually running the organization. So I could see there being real value in adding that to the city. I don't know if they have anything like that within their ranks right now. In terms of hiring a consultant to do the report, I don't think anyone would have accepted an internal report. And quite frankly, it's always good to get fresh eyes on what you're doing, particularly when you have long-serving staff that have been doing the same job for many, many years. It's nice to have someone come in from the outside and say, you could do that better, or that's a bad plan, or et cetera, et cetera. So I don't have an issue with a review. I think it's a good idea. I'm confident that it will be done according to professional standards, and hopefully we'll get a result that's going to benefit not just the city, but everybody that lives within it. in terms of the report that we haven't seen yet on the parkade, I don't know where that's at in terms of the report. I haven't heard anything about it other than what we talk about here, but it is only in fairness to reiterate that we're in the middle of a pandemic, and it is definitely having an impact, not just on supply chains, but on people's capacity and ability to even think clearly some days. So yeah, it's been 5 months, but the deed is done. It's just a case of figuring out the best way to make sure it doesn't happen again, in my view.
Mhm. Yeah, Chuck, there's an old, not an old joke, a joke that was going around in the early days of the pandemic when everybody thought it was a big conspiracy, and the joke was from project management people, and that's the joke from ask any project manager if they to get 10 people in a room together to do something is quite the thing. Never mind a worldwide cabal of people that are trying to do this. So I guess the
Bill, you tell jokes like my father-in-law.
I know I kind of lost where I was going there on that one.
I'm not the only one that I was thinking.
Basically, the whole thing is that if you think there's a worldwide conspiracy, talk to a project management person. They'll tell you how hard it is to get people in the same room on the same page. So I guess project management people aren't a bad thing. But your thoughts on the latest report out of City Hall?
Well, yeah, it's long overdue, and I really would have liked to have seen something happen a little earlier. But as you say, we're in the middle of a pandemic here, and there's people are stretched left, right, and center, and a lot of people working from home trying to figure things out. So kind of makes it harder for them to get after this right away. But I'm really glad that they've finally got on it and are getting a professional to look at this and figure out why we have a project that went 3 times over budget, you know. I don't know if they have project management professionals at City Hall, but if they do, there's got to be a change in the way they're doing things, and hopefully this will bring it all together and make it happen. You know, I think it was Brian Skaken in council who was complaining about how long it was taking to get this happening. But, you know, I think he's got to be happy now that it's actually underway. And it's going to take a few months, probably maybe even 6 months before we get a concrete report from these people. But in the end, we should not have this happening again. And that's what it's all about, right? Is getting better as you go forward, not getting worse. So I think they've done what they need to do to make sure that they're on the right track.
In fairness, though, it's not one instance, and in fairness, the leadership has changed as well. But you know, it was significant incidents, one after another, that have led to this point. And I do still think that they're going to face a strong challenge. You know, there's opposition to this report even coming forward, and you know that's fair. Everyone's entitled to their opinions. I think there will hopefully be some good information that comes out of that to help move process forward in a more seamless way going forward and allow that information to flow more freely. But it begs the question of internal governance practices and structures and what's in place there. So I think there's still a lot of open-ended questions and concerns that will come out of that you know,
that's what this new report's for, isn't it, Todd? Like the new report they're doing is about that internal structure and governance and decision-making process.
You know,
the whole infrastructure
leans on that, but when the structure talks about project management specifically to capital projects, that feels like a pinch of an afterthought into the report. So it will be interesting to see what comes out of that.
Yeah, I think most organizations, especially larger ones, are looking at a reorg coming out of the pandemic because so much has changed about everything from human resources to product supply to you name it. So I think an org structure revision and review is probably on the books anyway. And I'm interested that you think that they've added the capital project review just as an addendum. And I'm assuming what you're implying is that that's because of the issues coming out of the various capital projects like the bridge and the arcade. Am I hearing you right?
I think the org governance piece is the addendum to the project management side of it.
Oh. Yeah, I think I think you're right, Tracy. I think everywhere is going to be looking at doing a top to bottom review. I mean, the way things in the last year, it's pretty amazing how fast things have changed to the way things are done, and people's expectations of the way things are done. So I think they really need to do a complete organizational review, and it's got to include, you know, the changes to the way government funding and things are available now too. So there's a lot to look at.
And there is a
beyond
report
the
that
project
currently
management.
sits. Sorry, Chuck.
No, no
There-
worries. Go ahead.
Sorry, there is a report, right? I mean, Sherry Green had a report done, the core services review. I guess Lynn is in his 7th, 8th year as mayor, and so this would be going back over a decade at this point. But you know, part of that was implemented. A lot of it was never looked at, and it was put on the shelf by the incoming council. And that was a fairly expensive report, but a fairly extensive deep dive into the organization. And so there's some disparity around those two, and you know, maybe history is doomed to repeat itself if we don't look back at what we already have in our hands that was already paid for. There might be some value in pulling a decades old document off the shelf to see what was in there and what it said at that point and how that might apply today.
That makes good sense. That really does. Just take a quick look, even if it's totally off base to what we need today, taking a quick look and verifying that fact, or going, hey, maybe there's something here we can use, you know?
Actually use something from a report that was commissioned by a city. It's like, come on now.
I think it's probably in Tracy's shop somewhere now.
Yeah, I gotta say, I always love it when people are saying that history is important. It's a very important piece of my world. So yeah, I'll tell you, I would much rather be teaching history than living through it.
Yeah, that's for sure.
We're all living through it. That's what we do.
Oh, the living's interesting.
Well, and I would presume that any consultant that's going to do a new report will be given all of the old documents as part of that research that's done going into the new report. Certainly anytime we do anything, that's how it works. I'm pulling off documents that are 20 years old because someone put a bunch of time and thought into it, and then subsequent decisions were based on some of the vision coming out of those earlier reports. I think whether you look at them every day or whether it's something that you've been involved in the process of developing, once it's written, it's so ingrained in that organizational structure that in many ways it can sit on the shelf, assuming that the entire organization was involved in the development of it from start to finish.
But that implies that people actually know it's there and place some value in it, right? I mean, if you have a council that came up right after the report, looked at it and went, okay, and shelved it for the last 10 years, maybe they're not even considering it. So I think someone needs to draw attention to the fact that it's there, and maybe we need to take a look at it.
Todd, were you at the city when that report was done? Do you know?
No,
what its
I
contents
joined
are?
shortly after.
But I guess one of the questions is with all this, I think a lot of it boils down to how much authority you give city staff and how much you want council to be involved in this, especially with the parkade. I think that's the crux of the issue is how much do you let staff run? And because I think my view with the parkade is that the parkade got out of hand and staff really didn't want to tell council, but they kept going with it because they knew it was a political feather in the mayor's hat. He kind of campaigned on this, so they kind of kept pushing at it, and they got into all kinds of trouble about it. So I think when we talk about all these reviews, it comes down to how much authority do you give staff? You know, they've rolled that back. So I don't know.
I'm of two minds on that one. When you look at the politicization of everything, and if you have politicians involved in making decisions at a microscopic level, you're going to run the danger of political interference, and you're going to have people up in arms that politicians shouldn't be the ones making these decisions, that our professional bureaucratic staff are the ones that are hired to do this work. So I don't know that it's delegated authority necessarily that's the problem, so much as it could just be a communication process issue. I really don't know, which I guess is where this report will cover it.
Yeah.
And I see two sides to that as well, Tracy. And that's really seeing the value of the terms of reference for any investigation or any document that's being created on the taxpayer's dime is what are the terms of reference? How is this laid out? Who's involved? Process, timelines, all of that meaty information that doesn't expose any one individual and break any internal policies, but certainly allows the public a spirited understanding of how this is going to shake out and what the timelines look from that perspective. The other piece to that is, I think it comes down to the electorate. So when you say, I agree with you, we don't want politicians working at a microscopic level and micromanaging any processes. However, we need to do a good job of vetting our elected officials. What is their experience, work, life, and otherwise? What are they bringing to the table from an idea perspective? And then how coercive can they be through these processes? Because if we're just having these, popularity contests, because I like this person and I want them on council because they're great and they're really fun, but they don't bring value and they don't bring experience and knowledge and ideas to the table, then that becomes challenging down the road too. Delegated authority is another one altogether. That brings up so many challenges.
Capital projects are so specific, right? They need their own skill set. The politicians that we're electing
out too, which is problematic.
Yeah, and politicians are supposed to walk through the door with an overview. They're supposed to be the big picture people, eyes on the horizon, not down in the weeds. And the staff are the ones that are supposed to be the experts. So in my own operation, it's not political, but I rely on my management team because everybody who works for me is way better qualified than I am. And I would expect that just about every politician out there could make exactly the same statement with regard to the teams that support them and that do the work that they're elected to oversee.
That makes perfectly good sense. I mean, you really need to have that support team around you as a politician. A politician they're coming from outside, a different job, a different career. And so they need to be able to come in and know that they can rely on the team below them that's going to help support them and give them the information they need to make decisions that do come to them. So, yeah, I think it is really important that the politicians not just be, faces or popularity contest winners, but also are people who can use that information they gain from the team that's below them effectively. They need to be people that can get the big picture and pop a few ideas and go, maybe we can go ahead with this way and do things, and be clear and also channel the community's needs and wants. That's a very crucial part is they've got to be in tune with the community as well. The management team doesn't have to worry about what the community says. They just go ahead and do what needs to be done and what they're told to do,
Exactly.
right? It's the politicians that go, okay, they want us to do this. How can we make it happen? And then they go to the management team and go, make this happen.
And remembering that they only have one employee. The city manager works for city council and everybody else works for the city manager.
That's
so
right.
That city manager relationship is the key piece in this whole discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like Todd was saying, there's a real skill set to the politicians to be able to manage that fine line and to do that because, like it or not, in virtually every organization, empire building is a thing.
You
have bureaucrats that are in there and they're working to build their influence, right? And somebody's got to be able to see that at a political level or upper management level. And say no. And like Chuck was saying, you got to have someone who's in tune with the public. The debacle over the walking space at Massage Place Stadium a couple of years ago is a prime example. The city report came to limit that, came forward and made perfect sense, except for if you were the public and you wanted to walk, which is kind of what the track is, right? So, you know, luckily we had the good sense to change that, although it's not completely open now. But so how do we get people in those areas, politicians and a senior manager that can both walk that fine line?
Maybe we start by not constantly asking everybody to be fired or to resign when a mistake does happen and it comes to the attention of the public.
Yeah, I think that's key. I think you can't just go, oh, you screwed up, goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you got to say, hey, well, okay, we can do this better next time, right? You've
All
learned
that
now.
does is it creates an environment to hide facts rather than to share them because people are covering their own rear ends. And
Yeah.
I mean, politicians are accused of it all the time. They get elected and then spend 4 years campaigning to get reelected and don't worry about anything that they got elected for. But that is very true in an organization as well, whether it's the city or Exploration Place or wherever it is, that if you're in a position where you feel that making a mistake is going to harm you rather than let you learn from it and you'll get help to fix it, that is a completely different situation for someone when you do have a mistake. And Todd's right. Multiple times we've had these capital program issues. So I would be curious to see what this report says with regard to that corporate culture. And I know there was a significant shift between Ms. Green's culture and Lynn's.
Yeah, and you know, the challenge right now is, unfortunately, and we've said it on this before, city staff is taking a huge beating publicly because council is not acting quick enough on the parquet piece, and they're not putting information out there, and so it's reverting back to city staff, and city staff are being chastised, you know, publicly and online, and you know, it's challenging. So when we talk about that culture piece, it's very, very hard. And I've worked in a couple of municipalities, and I've seen different styles of culture and different types of culture building and different types of leadership throughout that. And I've worked with a number of politicians that had starkly different leadership styles too. And it's hard. These environments are hard. A lot of these people are high performers in their fields, and they're doing these jobs out of their love for the community. And it's challenging when leadership lacks and you get sort of caught up in the wake of political decisions or political non-decisions, as it might be.
But again, that circles back to the chief staff person. The chief city manager's job is to manage their team and protect their team from political interference. And then their job is to interface with the politicians. And the politicians are supposed to protect all of the staff from that public attack because they're the ones that are the representatives of the public. So you've got a relationship between a mayor and a city manager. Those are the two people that are interfacing between the general public and the team of bureaucrats. And that is where I think we have to figure out a better way to make sure that in the future, we're not going to run into these issues.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, really what happens is, what should happen is you should have the city coming to council going through the mayor to the city manager, and it all filtering down from there. But what we do have is everything kind of going sideways, and unfortunately through the media sometimes too, blasting individual management teams and cells within the city of PG infrastructure, and they're catching the brunt of things, whereas council is left sitting there going, oh, we danced around that one pretty good, didn't we? But it's their job to take the flag. They're the boys on the edge of the boat, you know. They're supposed to take the balance against the dock, and sometimes I don't see them doing it. You know, they seem to be stepping back a lot.
Yeah, sorry. Well, from a journalist perspective, I look at it a little bit different. I look at a city manager or some of these other senior managers, people that are making $200,000 a year. They should be held accountable publicly because they're the ones that are making the decisions. And it's tough. It's tough for city councils, especially when they're in the dark. And because that, you know, Dr. Brian Skaken, he's raised this several times. He's the one that's getting the flack, but he doesn't know what's going on. So there's that communication piece. but like I said, I also believe that some of these people in the senior positions, they should be held accountable too, because they're the ones that are making the decisions, and they have to be able to explain them, or council has to explain them.
So here's the dichotomy of this. You've got council that's elected on behalf of the community. So we're picking our representatives. That's on us. We wear that decision for 4 years, right, wrong, or indifferent. And then they appoint a city manager as their authority. And then that city manager goes out and hires. And so you mentioned this before, the empire building piece. There may be one thought process, and I've seen this happen in other municipalities, where management has a very driven thought process about how to do what needs to be done. Council may have a different vision of what and how that gets delivered. And the communication between the two streams doesn't line up.
Yeah.
And so council has made the change that's within their purview, which is the city manager. I would argue that it extends beyond that, because if they believe that there's other individuals that have any role to play, then they can direct their employee to do that. And if their employee does not do that, well, you change your employee.
Yeah.
So the reach extends far further than one employee. It's a nice line to play. It says it in the MGA, so you use it. But it's this weird specter of how you manage these relationships and these outcomes. But I think the most important thing that we have to remember is council is elected to serve and act on our behalf, to lead on our behalf. And so as people become vocal about necessities of change, whether that be political or bureaucratic, it's incumbent on council to take that quite seriously, because when an election cycle comes back around, you have to face those questions and those consequences or benefits of decisions and non-decisions. So the balance of how this works out is really, really challenging.
Yeah.
I
And
struggle with the notion that council, like Brian's claim that he was in the dark. When you're an elected official, you have a fiduciary responsibility to inform yourself. And if in fact you aren't informed and that comes to light later, that's actionable against whoever it was that lied.
But he's had to file FOI requests to get information, and that's sort of that's when the breakdown is. You know, when I was in Williams Lake, there was a situation there where they fired the chief librarian. This was the regional district, but the classic is we went to the politicians, and the politician said, "Oh, that was the administrator that did that. You know, we had nothing to do with that. We told it's the administrator's decision." Talk to the administrator. So, well, why did you fire the chief librarian? And his answer was, I was just doing what I was directed from by the politicians. So the public doesn't get an answer at all. They get no answer, because there's this wall that sets up where nobody's really accountable. And that's part of the problem. And with this one, I think part of the problem was that there was a breakdown between the chief administrator and council, I think, and that led to the problem, because I think my feeling is that Kathleen Soltis and this council got along very well for a long time, and something happened, and that led to the downfall. Right? So, yeah, how you solve
that's the thing. There shouldn't be a time where your council is blocked from information, or where they're not providing information to the public. I mean, I just believe the council should be a lot more open and transparent, so that you can see what's happening, and they should have access to any information they need. I mean, how can you lead without info, right? You shouldn't have to file an access for information request to find out what's happening in your own organization. That makes no sense. There's something seriously wrong if you have to go that route. You should be able to make a phone call or send an email and have the information come back to you. I know they only get their weekly information packets, but during that week, as they're reading through what they did the previous week, they should be able to access whatever they need to make sure that they've got what they need for the next upcoming meeting. The fact that you're having to file information requests and things like that is just, there's a major breakdown in the communication flow there.
I worked with a city manager who had a great mantra for any of us, and it was what one gets, all get. So if a member of council emailed a senior staffer and said, "Oh, I'm curious about X, Y, or Z," you would respond directly to that individual, copy all of council, and copy the city manager, so that there was never any opportunity for nefarious issues to go around. There was the tactical, foipable email trail of here was the question, here was the answer. It took a lot of the auspicious nature away from that. And to your point, Chuck, the transparency on this is vitally important.
Yeah.
We are in a hyper aware time in our lives, made more so by a pandemic, with people sequestered to home and work by and large, and so much more astute and looking at on our phones and seeing what's going on second by second. And so the urgency of information expedites tremendously. And so with that comes the need for greater transparency, but a higher level of communication as well.
See, Todd, you bring up something there that I think is really important. During this pandemic, I don't know if everyone feels it the same way, but I feel like people are becoming more and more in tune with finding online information, finding details about this, that, and the other. And I just think
just
people
wish it was all
are
good stuff they were finding.
yeah, well, that's the thing, right? I mean, they seem to be digging up a lot of
less likely to ask questions, unfortunately, right? So there's a desire for more information in some regards, but less of a desire to ask questions. So it's problematic because you get this glorious chunk of information over here that's missing a ton of detail.
Yeah.
One of my wife's friends says all the time, and I think this is a beautiful statement: if you want to find it on Google, you're going to find it on Google.
Oh yeah. Whether it's right or wrong.
Part of it too, particularly around the capital projects, is that there's this overarching feeling people have that there's something nefarious afoot. And I don't have that same feeling. I don't think that anybody was stuffing their jeans with lumps of money. I think that maybe there was mistakes made, or perhaps there's a process that isn't set up properly, or yada, yada. That's what this report is supposed to get to the bottom of, in theory. Because I think that that's the other piece that the pandemic has really made worse, is that when there is a mistake and there is a clear issue, everybody's assumption is that it was bad intent.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it was bad intent. I really don't believe it was. I think if in fact there were a series of mistakes made, they were mistakes, and that we can rectify it by re-implementing new procedures and policies, and that's what this work and time and study is going to be about. I just don't believe that any of the people involved in this council, the last council, any of the staff, current or former, I don't believe any of them are stealing from the voters or from the taxpayers. I think that it's just something, a situation evolved. The city grew up around some of these folks that have been there for decades, and stuff got overlooked that shouldn't have.
I agree with you in 50% capacity, Tracy. I definitively do not think anyone was stuffing their pockets. I think anybody who's spinning with something like that is probably ill-informed. That's such a huge scandal. I mean, we've seen that in Montreal and some of the larger cities where there was some mafia plays involved in these things. I don't think we're necessarily looking at a giant mafia play here in the city of Prince George. And I don't think any politician...
what a perfect place to hide it.
Yeah. It's out in the Pine Pass somewhere. But I do think an agenda was pursued at, in this case, really any expense.
Yeah.
Agenda you mean by building that?
Yeah, by pursuing it and tamping down information until it couldn't be tamped down anymore.
Yeah, something vital might have been overlooked, I think. Something vital was overlooked at the beginning, and somebody said, yeah, that's not going to be a big deal. We'll just go ahead and do this, and it won't be a big deal to take care of itself. And it turned out to be a big deal. And that's kind of the thing that I think seems to have been happening here.
But Todd, you've thrown shade at the mayor on this one before with this idea that it was tied to a feather in his bonnet.
I never said that at all.
I did.
Was that you, Chuck? Sorry, and it wasn't you, Todd. I take that back. I thought it was on this conversation just now.
No, it was Bill, I think.
Oh, Bill, get me in trouble. So the idea that this is somehow was all orchestrated to support an agenda, I don't know that I buy that either. And you've tied it to other capital projects like the Willowkill Bridge that, again, I think it all comes back to planning and engineering. That seems to be where the mistakes that end up costing a fortune are coming from.
Yeah.
There's definitively problems with planning and engineering, and they've made changes in that area. I mentioned earlier, not throwing shade on anybody, that costing of projects can't be done 2 years out. There's got to be a better process for managing that. But, you know, this is a significant amount of money to not come to light through finance and audit, through council, through regular reporting, anything like that. And so the emails that have been FOIP'd indicate that people knew along the way. So there were certainly people that knew along the way. So I don't think it's challenging for me to say that there was an agenda somewhere, some shape, somehow, because we know now that several or multiple people knew about that investment that continued to grow and grow and grow through the time. I'm restating facts. I don't think I'm throwing shade whatsoever. I think I'm saying
what agenda? It's the implication that there's an agenda, and the fact that that sounds.
The agenda was to get it built, and I would say the fact that so many people knew, and some people, if I'm remembering the emails correctly, some people even indicated significant concerns with the mounting costs, that they continue to pursue that regardless. And maybe, you know, maybe it's the former city manager and they've addressed that concern. But I don't think it's challenging to say that there was an agenda. There was definitively an agenda to move that project forward.
I think you've hit something there again. We don't know what happened with Soltis. And I think that may end up being key to a lot of this. You know, there may have been a problem with things that were implemented by her, or things that she wanted to do that were not conducive with other members of council or whatever. We just don't know. So I think we really need to know what happened to that relationship and why she left.
Hey, we should get a report done.
There you go. Well, I'll go back to Todd's here. We'll only say what we know happened. This came to light. Brian Skaken started questioning about it. And he started wondering why things were not being presented to council. And Kathleen Soltis, on one of her last council, might have been her last council meeting, told council in a very matter of fact, and some people may say looking down on them, way that this was contained in the 5-year capital plan report that went to the Finance and Audit Committee in January. If you had taken the time to read it, you would have known it. So she chastised council publicly because they were accusing her of hiding this. And she said very publicly that this was not hidden. It was in a report that went to council and nobody noticed it. So when somebody does that, well, then the relationship's kind of gone, right? And I think that she did that in one of her last council meetings. She pointed that out to them, that it wasn't hidden, and basically if they'd taken the time to read the reports, they would have known.
And then shortly thereafter, she said,
shortly thereafter she was gone. So I think that was probably the final straw. That this was already boiling and going on anyways, right? So I think she defended herself. Mm-hmm. And some people didn't like it. That's my take on it anyway.
Of course, you also have a responsibility as a chief staff person to highlight those items which are important.
That's the other question, is that she known this, but she might have said, taken the mayor's side, maybe not in a report, but say, hey, Lynn, look, we got real problems with this. And it doesn't seem like she did that. So.
Yeah, I mean, and you've got someone who's got control of that big an organization, you've got to think that they're going to be looking ahead and seeing things like this.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that their job?
So basically, in my feeling, what happened with Kathleen Soltis is the relationship between her and council broke down, and that's over this.
And a lot of this speculation, I think, is part of what's caused the bad feelings in town. And I'm very hopeful that this report is going to lay it all bare and we can move on collectively, because I actually think we have a really good council and we have really good staff over at City Hall, and the projects that are happening are good projects. And I would just like to see us all move forward.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah. So moving forward, let's move on to something more fun.
That was your cue.
Gave you a segue, Bill, and everything.
Learning on segues here. Now I forgot what I was going to talk about.
Tell us a joke.
Tracy, get your father-in-law.
He's watching. Hi, Zach.
Paid sick leave if you're sick with COVID. Whose responsibility is that? This seems to be a ping pong ball between the feds and the province as to who's going to come up with some. The feds did come up with a paid sick leave program, but it doesn't cover everything. The goofy thing, or not goofy, but the reality with COVID is if you're exposed, they want you to stay home for 10 to 14 days, and most people's sick leave doesn't handle 10 to 14 days. So who should be doing this?
Well, and most businesses can't be burdened with the additional costs. I think there's a couple of major pieces at play here provincially. One, it was a campaign promise that they were going to implement something. And last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, they said, no, we're not looking at that anymore. Enough political pressure has been applied over the last week that they're now looking at it and going to make an announcement maybe this week, maybe next week. There's a lot of challenges. So there's been historic overpayments to WorkSafe BC through the years. And we've heard this story time and time again. There was billions of dollars that were sitting there invested, maybe poorly, maybe not. Maybe they lost some through investment. Maybe they didn't lose some through investment. We should get a proper accounting of what overpayments still exist within that WorkSafe portfolio. The other piece is the EHT that they switched to, which was migrating businesses away from paying the Health BC figures and then putting that into the province, and then that's wrapped up. So there's money that sits in the EHT, because I think what we need to remember is the sanctions or the adjustments that are being put in place are being put in place for good reason through provincial health officers and through the Canadian health officer. And so it becomes incumbent upon government to come up with the solutions for these. These can't be more things that are burdened on businesses. They're overextended, they're overburdened as it is. We still haven't seen federally or provincially a strong COVID recovery plan. I think in BC yesterday was an interesting announcement, have not had any amount of time to dig into that and find the details of it, so I'm not going to speak to it. But they need to come up with this. If the result is the safety of us is me staying home for 10 or 14 days or however long it is, so that I don't spread it to my team and my team doesn't spread it to their families, and the inverted pyramid begins again, then it's incumbent on government to come up with what that plan looks like.
Yeah.
Well, I'll argue with you again. I don't know that it's all government's job. I mean, I operate a nonprofit, and we have always provided 10 days paid sick leave for our staff, long before there was ever any sort of thing like a worldwide pandemic. And for the most part, my staff don't use it. It's, if you need it, you end up with some kind of illness, you're off for a couple of weeks. Yeah, it's there for you. But most of the time, there's no cost to the employer in terms of providing that for them. I know for my own operation, since this is all stepped up and we've looked at a new work structure and I have set up work from home capacity, we've invested lots to make it possible for someone to go home if they've been exposed and isolate for 2 weeks and continue to work. So they're not actually on sick time, they're working from home. And I think that there needs to be some kind of a blend of that going forward. I don't see that this is going to go away anytime soon. And working from home is good for lots of different reasons. So I think there has to be a shared approach to this. It can't just be that government needs to provide 10 days paid sick leave. My concern has been that 10 days is not enough. If someone gets COVID and gets very ill, you're going to be into your short-term disability and your long-term disability, which then calls to the foreground the fact that most employers, small businesses in particular, can't afford to provide benefits for staff. So you don't have LTD and STD. I don't know. I'm not sure what the whole overarching solution to that is, but I can't see it just being a government responsibility. I think it's part of the cost of doing business.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you there. I've seen small businesses try to look after people when they were became seriously ill, and unless they have like an insurance package with a company that will allow them to provide long-term disability and things, it just doesn't happen. You can't do it at all. And many companies just don't have the resources to buy into those insurance packages. And somebody somewhere has to pick up the slack. And it's tough on small business. It's really tough on them. And though I don't really feel that it's the government's responsibility, somewhere it has to be shored up so that our economy just doesn't fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I'm going to plug the fact that the chambers have access. Chamber members have access to the Chambers Group Insurance Plan, and you can contact our rep, Linda Rempel, and you can get on the plan. So that will help you through that process. Mm-hmm. You know, the challenging thing for me is when we look at small businesses, and a lot of times it's, you know, one or two owner operators and a few staff members. And by and large, those staff members are part-time up to about 35 hours a week. And so they wouldn't be eligible for benefits anyway.
You're there. 20 hours a week is all you need.
Okay. So then you've got other employees that may or may not be eligible for benefits going through these processes. We don't know what their home situations are. We don't know what their family situations are. And you know, when I think about this, I think a lot of the argument stems when they talk about women re-entering the workforce as they've been most heavily impacted through the pandemic. So if we talk about a single mom or single dad that's dealing through these processes and has to self-isolate and can't draw a paycheck, but they work for a company that's, you know, 2, 3, or 4 people that are also struggling to pay their rent through the pandemic, they're struggling to make revenue. Their consideration is now not going to be, how do I help this person who's technically a member of our family and helping us move forward? The discussion is going to be, how do I save my business? And that's likely going to result in me terminating an employee that I don't want to terminate. So it's a devil's in the details types of things. Do we end up with more people who are now unemployed, who are employable, but can't even go to a job interview because they're sick with COVID and now have no benefits and no assistance? Or do we look for a solution that, you know, I hate to use the word, but maybe it's a patch for now until we see how this evolves and what our future is going to look like?
Yeah, there definitely needs to be an immediate solution. And you're right, that patch has to come from government. But I think that employers need to start thinking about a triple bottom line, not simply the bottom line that keeps the lights on, because the human beings are a huge piece of that, and their health and happiness and that of their families and their community at large are all absolutely integral to the economy. This isn't a human health or economy, they're tied.
And these are the long-term discussions that will result from this, right, Tracy? I mean, we agree to disagree on a lot of things, but I think we're seeing this very similarly. There has to be something from government in the immediate term to help bridge whatever it is. And then the long-term discussion is around what policy looks like going forward. But that takes a high level of engagement too, so that we understand the survivability metrics for all businesses too. We can't just say, sorry, every 4 employee business, you're not going to be a part of the solution. We don't need you anymore. So it's got to be a workable program.
Yeah, because this is a tough one. Like Tracy, you mentioned, you know, like you go on to short-term disability, and I remember back when I was in the corporate world, I think short-term disability, if I remember correctly, for where we were, was 10 days, and like you had to have like a really good, I think you had 3 days that you could kind of just call in sick. And after 3 days, you basically had to have, you had a note from the doctor or whatever. And then after 10 days, you went on short-term disability. And so the quarantine, at least at the beginning, they were saying 14 days. So even if you take in weekends, maybe you could stretch it, but you run into that whole different thing. So once short-term disability, if you've never been on it, you realize that, or you might not realize that that's a whole process. That's a whole different process of just calling in sick and saying, I'm sick, I'm not going to be in for a couple of days. And your boss says, okay, good, get some rest and we'll see you on Monday kind of thing. But short-term disability is the whole process. And I think that's part of the problem is that for COVID, it fits, there's that gray area where you're going to need to go on short-term disability, technically. And I think if you have some leeway from your boss, maybe you're okay, but some not employers are the same, and so some are good, some aren't. So yeah, it's tough. I think, I agree with everyone here. I think it needs to be a little bit from everybody to make it through, and some understanding from businesses too, right? That or from employers that, maybe giving somebody an extra couple of days if they got COVID.
Well, that's a key thing there too, where you're saying, I mean, that's initially your short term for if you've got to isolate for 14 days, right? But if you get COVID and it hits you hard, you can be home for like months.
Short-term disability in a hurry, right?
Yeah, like Brenda's on long-term disability. She's been off for 3.5 months.
Yeah,
and that's one bug. And if that hit somebody at a small business, how is a company going to be able to justify that? A company with 4 people, you're going to stay home for the next 3.5 months, and we're going to try and limp along with 3 people. That's an awful lot of extra work for people to assume, right?
Yeah, particularly depending on individual situations and which particular group or position within the economy you're in. The gig economy folks are having a hell of a time through this, because not only can they not work, but they have no benefits, and they're mostly living in communal type situations, sharing homes and apartments. Yeah, I don't know what the solution is either. I just think that there has to be a whole lot more empathy at all levels.
Yeah, good discussion to have today on National Day of Mourning. So I think we're all agreed here. We should all join a union.
What?
Yeah, I think we should. Let's unionize.
Okay, wait a minute here. We've gone sideways in a hurry.
Well,
I want to be on the union of Zoom panelists.
there you go.
I think it's a great idea. Let's do it.
Oh, I think we're done for the day. We are
We're coming up on an hour, so we quickly go around the horn if anybody wants to plug anything before we go.
Well, we've had lots of coverage this week around the COVID collection at the museum, and story actually went national, and Wesley Mitchell just donated some wonderful artifacts this week. So if there's anyone listening that has been collecting objects, come across cool images or anything like that that relate to the experience of this pandemic here in Northern BC, the Exploration Place would love to hear from you. So info@theexplorationplace.com, and we get a curatorial person to get a hold of you and talk to you about this new contemporary collection.
Today is the 1-year anniversary of Support PG. Can you believe it's been a whole year that program has been running? And I have to send a special thanks to Melissa Barcelos and her team in the Economic Development Office of the city. They are an engine that helps keep this moving, from a large standpoint. But our 2 teams work very, very closely together on this, and we can't thank Melissa and her team enough.
Chuck, any plug for?
For me, I'm just going to say it's cold and rainy. I'm not going to be out on my bike too much, but there are going to be guys out there in the rain. Keep an eye out. They're doing their best. Some of them aren't the greatest in the rain. It can be difficult. And just keep an eye out for everybody out there on 2 wheels, and for everybody out there overall. It's spring. let's not have any
I'd
mishaps.
say it would be guys out there in this weather, right?
Right on. And I'll finish up with, in all seriousness, it is National Day of Mourning, remembering those who are lost or injured in the workplace. We can all do that to honor those, and we don't have to join the union to do that. We can each do that in our own way. So, and just be careful. And I want to thank Todd, Tracy, and Chuck, and we will see you all again next week.